So this week, we're going to talk about police presence on campus, specifically Jordan Middle School. And we're also going to look at the city's newest piece of parkland up in the foothills, which some of us had the opportunity of going to see this week, so that was a lot of fun. The incident in Jordan that happened on the second day of school this year triggered a lot of concern, I'd say, among parents and also the school district. Why was it so significant? What happened?
I think it hit a lot of various levels. I think there was just confusion around how it happened. There's a lot of miscommunication. I think these officers are two school resource officers who serve mostly the high schools, but do interact with the middle schoolers as well, and they knew these students who were involved. They actually were called by a parent to take another child to school who didn't want to go to school because of some sort of conflict with another student. They drop him off at school, check him in at the office, and then decide they're going to go mediate with the other one of the other students involved.
And that's part of their job.
Right. They typically do that. They mediate conflicts. They do sort of get to know students. They are a familiar face on a lot of campuses, and it's in their contract to be interacting with students at brunch and lunch, and so that really is part of their role. And it also, I guess, is pretty typical for a parent to call for help if their child is truant or something's going along wrong. The school resource officers give out their cell phone numbers to parents who participate in the Parent Project, which is sort of a 12-week crash course on how to deal with difficult or at-risk children, a lot of advice about behavioral stuff and getting them to school. So any parent who participates in that program has a pretty easy direct access to these officers. And I think for parents who don't know about that or aren't familiar with it, it seemed a little strange to have that level of familiarity that you can just pick up your phone as a mother or father and call a police officer and they'll come to your house and take your kid to school.
Yeah, without getting into the specifics of who was involved in this. So a parent did do that, was having difficulty with her student and wanted some help getting him to school and keeping him safe.
Yeah, and because it derived from whatever this underlying conflict was, they then took the next step of we're going to talk to the other students involved. They did know them beforehand. And so that was where the communication breakdown was. They checked in the first student, and then we're going to go visit this classroom to talk to the other student. There's sort of various versions of the story. They might have mentioned something to someone in the front office who then didn't relay it to anyone else, or they might have just checked in by being there and checking the student in, but didn't say we're going to go, call this other student out of class.
There was a lot of confusion that seemed to emerge out of this, both what the role of the school resource officer was, whether or not there had been proper communication with the highest level of administration, which is the principal.
Yeah, and it was the second day of school. It was a brand new principal, Tom Jacobowski, who's worked at the high school level for many, many years and has interacted with the school resource officers before. So it's not like he's unfamiliar with them and their role either, but and he was in Jaguar Journey, which is the 6th grade transition program at the time, and he wasn't even notified until lunch. So I think there was also some communication breakdown there between him and his staff.
Yeah.
It seems really surprising to me that there would even be, that anyone would think it appropriate for a non-emergency situation for a uniformed police officer to go into a classroom under these circumstances. Have you been able to figure out what the actual protocol is or was, and whether it was violated or not in this case?
I was told that they are allowed to, and they do call kids out of class. And I don't know if there's a better manner to do it. I mean, school board policy, actually, which no one mentioned to me in the course of my interviews until after the story came out, states that for law enforcement interviews with students, there should be either a principal or a designated person present just as an observer, unless there's an investigation going on that would interrupt. So that on the school policy side, that seems to have been violated, but for the police side, they are allowed to go directly to classrooms and call kids out.
I mean, it's been a long time since I was in middle school, but I remember that if a police showed up on our middle school campus, it was a big deal. And it set off all kinds of rumors, and it was something that at the time seemed like, boy, this should not happen unless it's in a really, you know.
But it seems to me, though, these officers are already so well immersed in the school community. I mean, these are the school resource officer.
Not at the middle school level, more at the high school level.
And still, you got 2 patrol cars parked in front of the school on the second day of school. Officers actually with guns and all their, you know, paraphernalia, going into a classroom asking for specific students to come out of the classroom. I just don't see the point of that. Why not just have an administrator go and get those kids and bring them to the office?
I think that's the feeling, you know, if it's not an emergency situation, it is just mediating conflict, which the school can probably also help with. It seemed like just not the proper route to go.
Yeah.
I think some people would say, you know, on the side of the school resource officers, part of their role is to make their presence less alarming to kids, to build those bridges, especially, you know, in middle school. I can imagine high school is equally important, but when kids are starting to form their identities and their relationships and perceptions of what, you know, what adults do in the community and who to be afraid of and who not to.
This didn't exactly reinforce that approach, though. If on the second day of school, these middle school students are exposed to police officers who are engaged in a conflict situation.
Well, I think that's one thing that hasn't been brought out yet, which is this isn't just really an issue of communications, which is what the superintendent and the police chief have been focusing on, but really there was an incident with one of the kids and one of the officers that, according to one side, was kind of an extreme situation, and then according to another story, it wasn't as severe of an interaction as all that.
Yeah.
But the student that the officer was trying to pull out of class did run away, basically. I mean, everybody agrees on that.
Yeah, but it's, you know, there's 2 versions of either he escalated it or the police officer escalated the situation, causing him to run away.
Right.
Initially, I think we heard that the officer had actually chased the boy, which sounded alarming in and of itself.
Exactly, yeah, and there's, you know, there were various versions of this story throughout from various people who were there or heard third hand that, yeah, he was chased and then brunch let out and everyone saw, and there were, you know, cop cars out front and parents were there helping with Jaguar Journey and sort of were very alarmed, and then there were other kids who went home at the end of the day and their parents asked them if they knew about it and they had no idea.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it sounds from your reporting that where this is headed is in a clarification that officers on campus, for some reason, need to check in with a senior administrator, if not the principal, assuming the principal's available. Yeah. And I would assume avoid going into the classroom for a specific reason like this, if it can be avoided.
Yeah, and if it does have to happen, to have, you know, either a staff member or someone else there present from the school.
Yeah.
Some interesting comments about school resource officers in general online. It's been written about the role that they play and whether or not, if properly trained or improperly trained, they're actually escalating some minor conflicts into something that is, well, basically dealt with by law enforcement.
And I think there is some misunderstanding, but I mean, I was surprised at the amount. I mean, it makes sense that they should have the amount of training that they get, but some parents who I talked to about it thought that they had no training specific to juveniles or child behavior, and they get a lot of that, and they have crisis intervention training and all sorts of things, and there's advanced and basic SRO school, which I don't know the difference between the two, but it certainly is a lot of, they're trained to work with children, so they should understand how to mediate conflict between 12-year-olds and between 16-year-olds.
Yeah. How long is their stint with each as an SRO?
It's a minimum of 1 year, maximum of 3 years, and I think the current 2 are on their 3rd year.
Okay.
So they are, you know, familiar names and faces to a lot of people within the school community.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense, Elena, whether the teachers, the people, the ones closest to the students in general, whether they like this idea of the police being involved in mediating disputes between kids, or whether they would just as soon handle that as part of their role as teachers?
I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to any teachers about it.
I could say that in 2009, when the city was going through major budget problems and Jim Keane proposed cutting 20 positions, few generated as much opposition as the proposal to cut a school resource officer. They ended up cutting one officer out of the two, and it just people were talking about how valuable these officers are. I don't think I've heard a single comment to the effect of we shouldn't have officers in schools. And they restored it a few years ago in 2013.
Although, as I recall, when they did restore it, there was some reluctance on the part of the school district to agree to that. that the school district didn't want to pony up, I think it was some funds to help with that position. Does anybody remember that?
There's been discussions. I know the city has been consistently talking about trying to get the school system to support it, but
Right.
but for me, the kind of this question of who gets to fund which chunk of the officers, it's related, but it's really doesn't cut to the issue of whether people want these officers to be around. I mean, I've heard only positive things about them so far in my time here. I know there's plenty of situations around the country where, like, police have like a reputation for like a pattern of bad behavior, and I haven't really seen that with the SROs. That's why I'm a little reluctant to jump to kind of these conclusions that they acted inappropriately just because they came into the classroom, because I just don't know like what kind of manners they brought in. I don't know if they were willing, like, charged in their guns blazing. I mean, I would assume they didn't. So until I kind of learn more, and an ongoing police investigation and school district policies aren't the most transparent spheres, and here we have them both. So it's a bit of like a Rashomon. So it's kind of like judging them for what they did is a little bit tough with information we have from my perspective.
The parents at this point who were initially very concerned, what's their stance after a couple days of thinking about it and meeting with Chief Burns and also with the superintendent?
Yeah, I think they feel optimistic. They're, upset that it happened in the way it did, but are glad that it's sort of served as a catalyst to really take a look at these policies and the roles of the police officers and create a better understanding on all sides. So they seem very optimistic and positive about change coming forward, and are committed to also, monitoring it, and if things don't move the way they want them to move, to really sticking to their guns and putting the pressure on.
We should probably mention, it was mentioned in your story but not here, that one of the kids involved is African American, and I think the parent response has come from parents of minority kids that have a concern that, is there a bigger issue here that needs to be addressed?
Yeah,
and
that
I
was
know
certainly
that
one of the first reactions I heard. I mean, it was
Yeah.
concerning. The first story out is just the basic, those sort of higher level details with a police officer, an African American student, some sort of escalation and conflict. That,
Yeah. And of course the police were very quick to want to point out that the school resource officer is also African American, and that race played no part in any of the actions or decisions that were made. But I think that made this a more emotional situation than it might otherwise have been.
Yeah, and some of the first parents to write to the superintendent and the school board about this were the co-chairs of Parent Advocates for Student Success, which supports students of color and minority students, and they wrote a very strongly worded letter, expressing their concern about it. So, and that's certainly, it's one piece of it, but spoke to a lot of broader issues I think a lot of families feel.
I think that there's an interesting question that was raised, I believe it was on Chief Burns' part, about what happens when, are there any reports that are coming out of when officers deal with students? And there are a lot of details to be kind of put together in a policy at this point.
Yeah, I don't think, he said that, there isn't any requirement around documentation with mediation with students as their policy stands, and I can imagine that seems a little strange to the school resource officers who think, if I'm going to just talk with students who I know are struggling with something, I don't need to document that.
Put it in a report. Yeah,
but there is sort of a level of accountability that might not be there for certain situations.
Yeah.
And they said that they're going to be discussing that with the school district.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. This week, the City Council looked at some parkland that it found out it had 2 years ago. And we sent Gennady out to talk with Darren Anderson of the Community Services Department, and to give us a view inside the land, the new land, 7.7 acres. So we're going to take a look at that video first, and then we'll come back to discuss.
Very pleased to be here with Darren Anderson, Division Manager of Open Space, Parks and Golf Division in City of Palo Alto. And we're here at the 7.7 acre park site next to Foothills Park that the city inherited in 1981, but didn't really discover until 2 years ago when it was dealing with a proposed development from Mr. John Arriaga, who owns property next door. And so we're here to just to get a lay of the land and to talk to Darren about the site and some of the uses that the city's considering for it and some of the challenges. So I guess the first question I have for you, Darren, I know that for the past year and a half or so, you've been kind of at the forefront of these community conversations and meetings about what could possibly be here. So what are some of the ideas that came out of those conversations? What would people like to see here?
Yeah, we had the public outreach meeting in October of last year, and some of the ideas, there were kind of three major themes. The first one was recreation. What could we do out here for the people to enjoy this site recreationally? And a couple of the ideas were another campground, a group picnic area, or structures for special events, those kind of ideas. Another theme was restoration. We do so much restoration work in all our open space preserves, Pearson Rosadero, Baylands Nature Preserve, and this park, Foothills. And so this site could lend itself to that as well. So a lot of the people who attended that meeting were in the restoration world and coming in with ideas from the kind of the more basic restoration of planting native plants, maybe creating a meadow. Another option is native trees. And then a larger scale suggestion was, could we de-channelize Buckeye Creek? Allow it to meander through this area rather than staying within its channel or borders, and create one contiguous valley all the way up to the valley you see across the interpretive center.
I'm curious, are these options kind of either or because I can imagine messing with the channel and still being able to kind of do one of the other two ideas. So is there any thought to like mix and matching some of these three? Are there just three themes, or is this like a choice between them?
No, I think you're absolutely right. At this stage where we're at, it's really wide open, and none of them are mutually exclusive as far as I can tell. And I think where we'd really start to learn more is when we do the hydrology study.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because that was the big kind of theme at this Monday's council meeting. And the one action that the city took, I should just let our readers know, is they approved this hydrology study, which staff and the Parks and Rec Commission each recommended. They went along with it. So I think this is a good time for you to just tell us about this study and why you think it's important.
Yeah, Buckeye Creek has had a history of problems of erosion and downcutting. So this creek originates within Foothills Park up by Toll Camp, and has been channelized, meaning it can't escape its borders or meander. And because of that, it started to cut down, and as it cuts down, it takes rock and sediment and washes it downstream and deposits it in this parcel along the Buckeye Creek here, and has to be removed to avoid flooding. And so what we wanted was, let's figure out, get a hydrologist in, study and analyze why this is happening, and give us some recommended solutions to resolve the problem.
And so one potential option is getting rid of the channel and kind of restoring it to its natural state where it meanders and flows around.
I think that's a large scale one. It's one of the possibilities, I'm sure, but I'm no hydrologist, and this is why we bring in an expert to say what the fixes could be.
And of course, Buckeye Creek was kind of at the forefront of the discussion as one of the challenges that this site presents. But in your report, you outlined several others, some relating to Buckeye Creek, some relating to the soil quality. Can we talk about some of the constraints that the city's facing with kind of enhancing this site?
Sure. Yeah, the soil was another challenge. As I mentioned in the staff report, there's a quarry right next door, and the spoils, or overburden as it's called, was placed here. So we've got about 5 feet of overburden, which is very poor condition in terms of drainage or value for planting trees and shrubs. And so this hillside here and this valley floor has got that overburden on it. So that's one of the challenges, is if we were going to do restoration, we've kind of got a compromised foundation with which to start. Another challenge is that we're surrounded on 3 sides by a private residence, and the homes are very close to our border. Directly behind me there's a residence, and on that side too there's a caretaker's residence. It's right next to our property line. And so noise and privacy are issues too. Typically we wouldn't put something like a campground immediately adjacent to someone's home. You'd ideally have space both for our park visitors and for the residents. And
another kind of challenge that was brought up by Parks and Recreation Commissioner Pat Markovich is a safety issue having to do with culverts. Can you mention a little about that? She said something about possibility of, children stumbling onto them, because there are large culverts like at various sections of the creek.
True.
So what is that issue? Is that possible? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. It's directly behind me is the most significant one, and you've got this steep roll off down into the creek, and as you travel down the creek another 20 feet, there's about a 7-foot diameter, 6-foot diameter pipe that leaves our property and progressively shrinks down and carries away Buckeye Creek underground and then out as it leaves the area. And in a rain event, if someone were playing down there, that would be dangerous. It's not an insurmountable challenge. We could fence off this area and put in the necessary gate to allow a backhoe to get in and clean out the sediment.
Yeah, and I kind of have a sort of a broader question. I mean, Foothills Park is obviously one of the great jewels in the city system. It's like 1,400 acres, and this is only 7 acres, and the city is devoting like a lot of energy into it. So I'm curious, do you think it's like actually worthwhile putting this much energy into kind of this much effort, this many costs, given that there's this huge park right next door? And what are the benefits of going through this process, kind of considering the context of being part of this huge system and this being a relatively small site?
It's a very good question, and one that we did wrestle with the Parks Commission. Right when the council dedicated this parkland, they directed staff to go meet with the commission and work through this process of what the best land use would be. That was some of the feedback we got both from the public and from the commission itself during the process of having discussions. Is it worth it? Should we be putting our funds here and time and energy, or is it better suited elsewhere because we have so many amenities, as you pointed out, 15 miles of trail, a lake, and 1,400 acres of beautiful open space immediately adjacent to this parcel. And I think the answer really lies in the park's master plan. That's where we get that feedback. And to your point of, is there value in it? I think so. I think any outreach where you say, what do our residents want? And how would you want to use this is of value. And we did collect a lot of good feedback. I think it gets tied into the park's master plan, which will be completed by the time we have the Buckeye Creek study done, and really say, is this the right place, the right time, the right resources to spend here, or is it really better to allocate it elsewhere? So I'm looking to that document, of course, our commission and council, to say what's the appropriate place and how much.
Yeah, I mean, there are times in discussion where it's almost like getting like an awkward present for the holidays, where first you say, oh, great, thanks, which was like the last 2 years when they were like, passing resolutions to thank the Lee family.
Yeah.
But then the next phase is, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the city appears to be in. So, so what are the next steps? You mentioned the park's master plan, the hydrology study. They're supposed to be completed like within a year or so. Is that right?
I think the park's master plan should be done early next year. I don't have the exact date because it's yet to be determined. And we met with council recently, and they're kind of helping us through the process to really get it right. And then, you want me to wait for this?
Another local issue.
The hydrology study is the other really big piece of this to know how to go forward, and we're looking at about a year for that process. So around June or August, we'll come back with recommendations for the Parks Commission to consider, and then ultimately the council shortly thereafter.
Okay, so next late summer, fall will be kind of the next time when we take up the subject and see if we have any more data that could inform the decision.
I think so.
Well, thank you so much, Darren. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
All right, well, thanks for that report. And I was kind of curious. We both went out to the lands first time seeing it. Were you surprised at all by seeing what was actually there compared to some of the descriptions that we'd heard of?
It actually was a little bit. It was actually better than I expected. I've heard people kind of saying things about how it's all gravelly, it's kind of dead, nothing can grow in there. It's Pat Markovich said it's like worse than her front yard. I've never seen her front yard, but she kind of meant it disparagingly. She's a Parks and Rec commissioner. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, in the context of Foothills Park, which is pretty gorgeous, it doesn't look like much because it's been neglected for so long. But there are trees on the site. There is a little creek that's dry right now. It looks like at the very least it has potential to become something nice. Yeah. And, I felt like it's gotten kind of a bad rap.
It was a lot flatter than I expected. Because when the description comes up from the Community Services Department that it's rocky because of the quarry, you think like there's boulders, people are going to be like climbing on top of gigantic rocks. Not that at all, just a nice flat.
You could do track sprints through that thing.
Yeah, I was envisioning a kind of a gravel pit.
Yeah.
Sort of, but it didn't look that way. From
no,
the
not
video,
at all. No, I mean, and there are hills like flanking the site, and a big chunk of it is hilly outside, but there is like a flat area in the middle that seems perfectly suitable for some kind of an amenity.
Yeah, Darren Anderson, I thought it was really interesting that he said there's 5 feet of this discarded quarry rock that kind of forms the bedding of the land, and that's why it's so difficult to plant things. But you couldn't tell from just looking at it; it's pretty darn flat.
And there's trees there, so some things are planted.
Nice
I mean, it was
redwoods.
a struggle, but there are trees. You just took a lot of compost to get them.
Yeah. Also surprising was how close it is to John Arriaga's property. I mean, what you can see through the fencing, which was just
that grass was so green. It's incredible.
You could definitely tell.
Yeah, he owns property on 3 sides of the 7.7 acre site. The other side is Foothills Park, but you could see, I mean, it's fenced off, and just you could see the color completely change in the landscape. It's rich green on the other side, and this
Where
kind
does
of
he
dirt
get
color.
his water?
It's a good question. I'm not sure.
So
I'll give him a
there was
call and
reference
see if he responds.
in your talk to 3 private residences surrounding on 3 sides of this property. One is Arriaga's. Who are the other 2?
I think it's all Arriaga surrounding.
Okay,
Well,
so
one's
it's just
Arriaga,
three
one's his
sides.
caretaker.
Yeah, there's
His caretaker has his own grounds.
right.
But those
On
dwelling
one side.
units then are all part of the Arriaga property there.
Yeah,
Okay.
he owns the property.
Yeah. So one of the interesting points that Darren brought up was just that they don't want to have park activities that is too loud or, too intrusive to private property, even though, the homes themselves aren't smack against the fence. But that they have to be considerate of that as part of the study that's going on. So there was another thing that came out while we were there, which was that there's a nursery of native plants perched onto the property. And when did that come in, and why did the people there feel a little bit like their future's uncertain?
Well, they came in 13 years ago. It was an agreement with the city at the time, and it's like right when you enter the property, there's like a gate that kind of right past the gate. There's a nursery that's a little greater than half an acre, like maybe 4 or 5 little greenhouses and
yeah.
volunteers sorting seeds. It's a delightful little operation. But yeah, so for 13 years they've been out there, and they have about 20,000 plants a year, sometimes more. And they are feeling a little uncertain because of this whole discussion that the city's having. It's right now it doesn't seem like they'll be moving anytime in the next at least couple of years. But if they do want to make like any big infrastructure improvements or things like that, it does kind of throw a little wrench into the planning process. Not to mention the possibility that they might have to find another site if the council and the community decides that they want to use this parkland for something else.
Did you say 20,000 plants a year?
Like seeds, yeah. They propagate to, they give them to all the different open space preserves.
Throughout the
Throughout
Bay
Palo-
Area, or
There, Santa Cruz through East Bay.
Kind of like this region,
talked
yeah. A lot of it is in Palo Alto, I think. Something like to the order of 10,000. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, and you had asked the staff that we talked to over at Actera whether or not their use was actually congruent with the deed of the property. It seemed to be their opinion that it was completely congruent.
They were very adamant.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing they said, we have a letter from Russell Lee saying he likes it. Lee's granddaughter is a volunteer with Actera. And I mean, I haven't seen the letter, but I mean, if Lee was very specific in the conditions of giving the gift to the city, that it has to be used for conservation, land restoration, kind of preservation, park purposes. And the nursery is maybe a little more of an intense use than you would expect, other parts of the park, but considering Actera's mission and what this nursery is used for, to support open space districts, it seems, at least in that sense, consistent with the spirit of the deed.
Did staff there have a strong feeling whether or not they wanted, they were going to open it up to the public now to see how people feel about it, and what, the sort of the argument that the council had, or that they wanted it to be?
Staff wanted it to be closed, and the council ultimately decided to keep it closed with some discussion, and there were some people dissenting.
Actera.
Oh, Actera staff? Actually, I'm not sure. I haven't really asked them that question. I mean, I would assume it might prove a complication, at least in the interim, because they would need security upgrades, because right now they're fenced off. And so I guess if you were to open up to the public, you'd need to spend about $50,000 for fencing and things anyway. It'd probably be a disruption, but I don't think, they haven't really expressed any strong opinions. And they did speak at the council meeting too, and the subject didn't really come up so much.
seems to me if Actera remained, it could become part of the educational aspect of opening the property up.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, if you've got that kind of an operation going on there, and it's not a commercial operation, so why not let the public see how that works? How do you have 20,000 plants raised in a year and distributed?
Yeah, and I think the city council would agree. That's why I'd be a little surprised if Actera is forced to move, because on an unrelated discussion this week, they were talking about the new parks master plan, and one of the overarching comments was, in this plan, we need to have more about nature preserves and more education. And here you have like Actera in a nature preserve providing education, which it already does. So it seems very consistent with what many of the council members want to see. But there is that kind of little element of uncertainty, because you still have to go through the public process and make sure that everyone agrees that that's the best use.
One of the most fascinating things to me is just how this plot of land was able to exist without people knowing about it since 1981, when it was given over, and the fact that Russell Lee gave or sold the land for Foothills Park to the city back in 1958. So there's a 1958, the whole Foothills Park, and then there's this little sliver that's almost 8 acres, you know, that's been sitting out there that was deeded in 1981, and what happened to it in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. You hear the council talk all the time about Palo Alto is a built-out community. We can't have any more office. We can't have any more housing. Then, oh, whoa, 7.7 acres. Where did that come from? So yeah, it is a little surprising. But just looking at the history of this parcel, it's kind of easy to see why nobody was aware of it. There's been like big periods in which, for 10 years, it would be leased to John Arriaga to be a staging ground for his construction, and the council wasn't really involved. It was mostly like staff-level decisions. And then, you know, Actera didn't really deal with the council. They dealt with Greg Betts, who was one of the few people in the city hall probably aware that this is a city-owned site. So when this council was elected and the last council came in, I don't think any of the members knew that the city owns land like just west of most of Foothill Park.
Well, it's kind of ironic that the person who benefits from this space going unnoticed is John Arriaga.
Yeah.
And it was through his efforts to actually buy the property that caused the disclosure that it existed, and that it now is subjected it to
is
this.
extremely ironic.
Yeah.
This is the silverest lining on this dark cloud brought up in the grand jury report.
Yeah.
They should call it Transparency Park or something, but yeah, it is quite strange.
But I thought the most interesting question was the one you posed at the end of your visit out there, which was, we've got this huge park with all kinds of wonderful resources within the park. Is it really something that our city needs to be spending its time, money, and resources on this small little 7 acres? And does it really move the needle in terms of providing, you know, a valued additional resource to our community? And that's a rhetorical question, I guess. But it seems to me that's got to be on the table. It's just, how much is this property worth in terms of the big picture?
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like at the staff level, their hands are a little tied by the council's ambition.
Sure.
I mean, this property has gotten so much publicity because of 27 University and John Arriaga and all that, and the council, you know, 2014 had this resolution to the Lee family. Thank you so much, belatedly by 24 years or whatever. Thank you so much for this property. It's kind of politically awkward to just say thank you and now we're not going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, it is kind of weird because like Foothill Park is like what, 1,400 acres, and it's gorgeous, and then you have this kind of like 7 funny ones, and now the city's going to have this long outreach process, this year-long hydrology study. But who knows? It might end up being the best part of Foothills Park in a few years.
It's already been 35 years since they gave it to the city, so what's another year?
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll follow this story and others next week, and you can always find us on paloaltoonline.com and on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly.